All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I know there are quite a few more people that RSVP'd, but we got a lot of material to get through, and I know a lot of you have 1 o'clock meetings, so we're going to start. We're going to try to be done around 1:45, so you can get to those meetings. So my name's Quinn Heiner. I've been with STG for almost 5 years now, and presentation today is on 7 habits of highly ineffective software engineers. So how is this brown bag different? Well, first off, it is non-technical. With the exception of one of the skills, you know, I kind of had 2 directions to go with talking about habits and whether they're effective or ineffective, regardless of that kind of going down the direction of whether we want to talk about technical things, like things that we could do to improve our code, the quality of our code, things like that, versus more soft skills, more non-technical things. And I decided to go down the latter route. So basically, everything in here falls under more of the category of career development or soft skills. And when you think about brown bags in general, either we're going to teach a new tech skill or talk about some of the latest developments in tech, but I decided to go down that third category of career development. So in terms of disclaimers, the list is arbitrary. It's in no way related to Stephen Covey's book. It just happens to be 7. I thought that was a nice number. If you ask 7 different software engineers, what are the top 7 ineffective habits, you'll get 49 different answers, right? So this is not the ultimate list. It's not comprehensive. You'll definitely notice some overlap as we go through these different habits. And then a lot of them are talking about multiple things, and we kind of roll them up and cohesively into one habit. So I promise I'm not singling anyone out. I'm not thinking of any one person or company in particular as I prepared this, so you don't have to worry about that. And certainly I'm not the subject matter expert. I don't claim to be the perfect example of any of these. So in terms of house rules, check your egos out the door, because I brought mine. Just kidding. But whether you're the most senior guy in the room or junior, either way, let's set our egos aside and keep an open mind as we learn things together. And of course, we don't want to single anyone out. If you have some comments or questions as we go through, just feel free to raise your hand. Just keep them brief and on topic. And again, speak in generalities when you're talking about people and companies, unless you want to highlight some positive aspect. So without further ado, let's go to habit number 1. Excuse me. Don't ever try to rebalance the time, scope, quality triangle. So in terms of time, scope, quality, and embracing agile, I like this new Dilbert comic here. Look at this new agile thing to deal with unpredictable events and things we cannot control in our projects. We can prioritize, reduce the scope, change requirements at any time, increase the chances of success of the project. So the boss says, okay, well, look, with your new project, let's do a fixed deadline, fixed scope, fixed quality, and you can be agile inside this triangle. Another one, we're going to try something called agile programming. That means no more planning, no more documentation, just start writing code and complaining. Well, I'm glad it has a name. That was your training. So let's see, in terms of managing client expectations and how it relates to the time scope triangle, let's see what Scotty had to say about it.
My clothes would have superpowers.
After the ad, of course.
Engine startup routine. Do you know that your dilithium crystals are going to fracture?
We composite the crystals while they're still inside the articulation frame. Look, Mr. Scott, I'd love to explain everything to you, but the captain wants this spectrographic analysis done by 1300 hours.
Do you mind a little advice? Starfleet captains are like children. They want everything right now and they want it their way. But the secret is to give them only what they need, not what they want.
Yeah, well, I told the captain I'd have this analysis done in an hour.
How long would it really take?
An hour?
Oh, you didn't tell them how long it would really take, did you?
Of course I did.
Oh, Laddie, You've got a lot to learn if you want people to think of you as a miracle worker.
So there you have it, managing client expectations from Scotty. So in terms of the time scope quality triangle, there really are so many different variations of it. There are books and volumes of books have been written about it. It's at the heart of project management. But really, when it comes to development, how we should view it from our side as developers is it's really tend to view it as a time scope quality triangle, whereas management tends to view it as a time scope resources triangle or time scope cost. So sometimes we as developers don't think about the dollar amounts of work that we're doing. We don't think this bug is going to cost X amount of dollars. And likewise, sometimes managers think it's just about time scope cost and that quality will just somehow, magically appear as a result of, increasing resources or increasing time. And so basically defining exactly what it is becomes important. And this is a very important quote, I thought, from talking about IT projects and healthcare.gov and some of the failures with that. He said, if I had to design a litmus test for managing IT projects, I would look for just one signal. Can anyone with authority over a new project articulate the trade-off between features, quality, and time? When a project cannot meet all three goals, the situation healthcare.gov was clearly in, something will give. If you want certain features at a certain level of quality, you better be able to move the deadline. If you want overall quality by a certain deadline, you better be able to simplify, delay, or drop features. And if you have a fixed feature list and deadline, which is kind of what a lot of us fall into, quality will suffer. I have this plaque at my house. It's called Murphy's Law, and I think this applies to programmers. Nothing is as easy as it looks, especially when you're, when you're a client, you're looking at a web form and you're like, how hard is it? It's just an editable grid, double click. Shouldn't be hard, right? So everything looks easy on the surface. Everything takes longer than you think. That's definitely the truth with development. And whatever can go wrong will. The first 90% of the code accounts for the first 90% of the development time. The remaining 10% of the code accounts for the other 90% of the development time. Isn't that the truth? I have a project manager I work with, and he says, my rule of thumb is in managing user expectations, I think of how long it's going to take me or as a developer, and I double it. And he's never gone wrong with that approach. And I think that's a good rule of thumb, is it always double what your initial estimate is going to be. Really, it's all about building a relationship of trust with your users and communicating very clearly. I have a bunch of C's listed here: clear, concise, constant, consistent, catch-all communication, because the sooner you catch miscommunication in the process, the cheaper it is, because we all know how much more expensive it is to fix things because we were not on the same page when we have to fix it in prod versus testing or development. And then Agile is really good for being flexible, but it's also a great rebalancing strategy as you're constantly trying to rebalance the triangle. Really, it comes down to just knowing when to say no and when to say yes. When to say no when you know that the scope creep won't provide an ROI. And sometimes we have to learn to stretch ourselves as developers. And instead of always saying no, learn to say yes when it makes sense and adds value to the project. And of course, using the right data to assess progress. Managers tend to view, like we were saying, they view the triangle a little bit differently. So usually it's all about timeline and budget, but really I recommend that we start incorporating user stories and user acceptance testing into the scope and timeline. And I think that will help us know exactly where we're at in the project. So habit number 2, only choose battles you will lose. And basically what I mean by this is getting involved in office politics and just being a confrontational person and being over dramatic about things. Pick your battles. You don't have to show up for every argument you're invited to. I think that's so true. And here's some advice from Justin about how to deal with office politics and choosing your battles wisely.
Is this my car?
After the commercial, of course.
There's one of these. Is this my...
Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning into advice from Justin this week. The question that you guys voted up last time was from Mighty Swywool, and they asked if I could make a video on dealing with office politics. So the first point is about diplomacy. One of the most powerful skills to have in a professional setting is the ability to understand why 2 or more parties are at odds and finding common ground. It's especially difficult when people with conflicting views ask your opinion on something, putting you in the uncomfortable situation to either cheerlead or fan the flames by disagreeing. The best strategy to avoid feeling two-faced is simply stating, no comment, it's not my place to discuss that, or I don't know enough to have an opinion. You know, it'll surely frustrate them, but most people will respect your tact. So the second point is that you need to respect the org chart. A common mistake that many people make is circumventing or disrespecting someone's position or responsibilities in an organization. Whether intentional or unintentional, most victims treat this type of insubordination as a personal affront. An obvious example is if you go over your boss's head and interface with their superior, and in the process make your boss look bad. I understand that workplace subversion can sometimes be tempting, especially if you don't find the person terribly confident. But you must always remember that you don't have to respect the person, but you must respect the position. So the third point is about separation. Another clear way to avoid office politics is to keep your professional and your personal lives as separate as possible. This means staying away from workplace romance, not adding coworkers on social media sites, not talking about your drunken exploits over the weekend, and so on. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to be antisocial, just make sure you exercise caution with the things that you say and do. So the fourth point is about playing the game. If all else fails, sometimes the path of least resistance may be to simply grin and bear it. You know, you can do your work, you can keep your head down, and focus all of your energy on not getting involved with unnecessary drama. I realize that may be unavoidable, and sometimes the act of not participating makes you a target, but it's always better to take the high road. So the last point is about honesty. The number one most important guiding principle in dealing with office politics is always to be honest and tell the truth. It has been my experience, not only in the workplace, but in life, that as long as you keep your integrity, you will be happier, more successful, and well-respected. So thanks so much for watching. If you have some tips on how you deal with office,
I thought some really good points that he made. And I think this relates to development. You know, have you ever met a developer that loves to take a glamorous stand on everything? And they're very, very opinionated. And they like to get meddled into politics. They like to pick sides. And they love to be the martyr. They love to say, I told you so afterwards, or I warned you about this. So avoid being a diva, I think, is a good way to improve our battles. Two types of battles, really, engineer versus engineer. And this really comes down to architecture decisions, implementation battles, things like that. Nothing's worse than a developer that insists on everyone conforming to doing things their way. And so healthy debate's good, but sometimes we have this disagreements that can really mark the painful death of a project sometimes because of it. So embrace rough consensus, working code, kind of the agile motto there, over perfect architecture. And really it's all about long-term maintainability and simplicity. So engineers versus customers, there's certainly two camps. There's the customer's always right mentality, and then there's the I know what's best for you mentality. And so trying to balance their needs and the domain knowledge with your knowledge of the system, I think we can really kind of meet on middle ground and negotiate and compromise with stuff like that. I'm sorry, a lot of these slides are really wordy, but there were some people that weren't able to attend today that wanted to make sure I have summarized everything that we talked about today in the PowerPoint slides so they don't have to go back and watch me talk for 45 minutes. So bear with me on some of these slides. Habit number 3, only strive for 2 out of 3 on the golden trifecta for a model employee. So you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is the golden trifecta for a model employee? Well, let's find out. So Neil Gaiman, he's a freelance artist, gave a commencement speech at the University of Arts. And he talks about these 3 attributes. And what I feel is everything you look for in a good employee in general, especially good software development, boils down to one of these 3 things. Let's see if I can find 1406.
Chronological challenge.
Okay.
But you get work however you get work. But people keep working in a freelance world. And more of today's world is freelance. Because the work is good. And because they're easy to get along with. And because they deliver the work on time. And you don't even need all 3. 2 out of 3 is fine. People will tolerate how unpleasant you are if your work is good and you deliver it on time. People will forgive the lateness of your work if it's good and they like you. And you don't have to be as good as everyone else if you're on time, and it's always a pleasure to hear from you.
So he says 2 out of 3 isn't bad, but really we should strive for 3 out of 3, right? So the 3 points that he made: deliver quality results, you deliver on time, and you're a team player. Really, it all boils down to those 3 things, in my opinion, in terms of good attributes of an employee. Able hands are more favorable to business than adorable hearts. I completely agree with that. So in terms of delivering on time, it all goes back to the time scope quality triangle. You as the developer have a lot more control over that triangle than you think sometimes, and being able to build a relationship of trust both with you and your or with your clients, your customers, and your managers will help with that. And of course, you can miss a deadline. It's okay, but as long as the customer's expectations are set beforehand and there are no surprises, then usually you're okay with that. Delivering quality. We'll talk more about this in habit 6 on making assumptions about requirements, because quality also includes relevant and delivering exactly what the customer wants, right? And we'll talk about, in terms of delivering quality, knowing your stuff and being a good programmer. We'll talk about the concept of a JIT programmer more in habit 4. So again, all of the other habits kind of stem under these 3 categories. Being a team player. Obviously, we need really good soft skills and avoid being confrontational. Always having to go against the grain is one of the worst attributes of software developers. And I notice it a lot, especially with senior levels, developers of saying that I know how to do it, so you're going to do it my way or the highway type of thing. And it really costs the team its velocity when you're not on the same page. And if you've met a fairly negative person, you understand wholeheartedly that negativity breeds more negativity. Doug Turner in his Pluralsight course talks about this. So habit number 4, ineffective habit number 4, I guess. Don't ever adapt as technology changes. Stick to what you know. This is probably one of the most important habits because it involves constantly learning and relearning and knowing when to unlearn certain things. And so we could do a whole other brown bag on tips to stay up and keep up with technology and keep your skills marketable. But Charles Darwin, this is roughly paraphrasing, said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And I think that's absolutely true because we've evolved, right? So listen to how well this person over here on the left, the programmer, addresses the client's needs.
For weeks, I've been investigating the can-be-killing murders with a certain morbid fascination.
This is in real time.
I'll create a GUI interface using Visual Basic. See if I can track an IP to this.
It's not bad, huh? Okay, so now this one's a little bit longer. It's about a 5-minute video, but I thought it was good to include in here, called the concept of useful frustration. If you've ever tried doing something handicapped, for example, trying to code in Notepad or something like that without IntelliSense and your IDE and all the fancy stuff, and being able to really understand the code rather than relying on tools and equipment and libraries and things like that and learning. If you've ever tried to do that, you'll find that you actually develop your skills a lot faster and more effectively. And so this is an example in music. By day, I'm a software engineer, but by night, I'm a musician. And so I really connected with this video. I thought it would be good to show. So it's about 5 minutes talking about the concept of useful frustration and how, listen to how this person that he talks about in the video is able to adapt.
If my clothes would have superpowers.
After the ad.
Late in January 1975, a 17-year-old German girl called Vera Branders walked out onto the stage of the Cologne Opera House. The auditorium was empty. It was lit only by the dim green glow of the emergency exit sign. This was the most exciting day of Vera's life. She was the youngest concert promoter in Germany, and she had persuaded the Cologne Opera House to host a late-night concert of jazz from the American musician Keith Jarrett. 1,400 people were coming. And in just a few hours, Jarrett would walk out on the same stage, he'd sit down at the piano, and without rehearsal or sheet music, he'd begin to play. But right now, Vera was introducing Keith to the piano in question, and it wasn't going well. Jarrett looked at the instrument a little warily, played a few notes, walked around it, played a few more notes, muttered something to his producer, and the producer came over to Vera and said, "You don't get a new piano. Keith can't play." There'd been a mistake. The Opera House had provided the wrong instrument. This one had this harsh, tinny upper register because all the felt had worn away. The black notes were sticking, the white notes were out of tune, the pedals didn't work, and the piano itself was just too small. It wouldn't create the volume that would fill a large space, such as the Cologne Opera House. So Keith Jarrett left. He went and sat outside in his car, leaving Vera Brandes to get on the phone to try to find a replacement piano. Now, she got a piano tuner, but she couldn't get a new piano. And so she went outside and she stood there in the rain, talking to Keith Jarrett, begging him not to cancel the concert. And he looked out of his car at this bedraggled, rain-drenched German teenager, took pity on her, and said, "Never forget, only for you." And so a few hours later, Jarrett did indeed step out onto the stage of the Opera House. He sat down at the unplayable piano and began. Within moments, it became clear that something magical was happening. Jarrett was avoiding those upper registers. He was sticking to the middle tones of the keyboard, which gave the piece a soothing, ambient quality. But also, because the piano was so quiet, he had to set up these rumbling, repetitive riffs in the bass. And he stood up, twisting, pounding down on the keys, desperately trying to create enough volume to reach the people in the back row. It's an electrifying performance that somehow has this peaceful quality, and at the same time it's full of energy, it's dynamic. And the audience loved it. Audiences continue to love it because the recording of the Cologne concert is the best-selling piano album in history and the best-selling solo jazz album in history. Keith Jarrett had been handed a mess. He'd embraced that mess, and he'd soared. But let's think for a moment about Jarrett's initial instinct. He didn't want to play. Of course, I think any of us in any remotely similar situation would feel the same way. We'd have the same instinct. We don't want to be asked to do good work with bad tools. We don't want to have to overcome unnecessary hurdles. But Jarrett's instinct was wrong. Yeah, thank goodness he changed his mind. And I think our instinct is also wrong. I think we need to gain a bit more appreciation for the unexpected advantages of having to cope with a little mess. So let me give some examples.
I thought it was a really good point that he makes. And paraphrasing a famous audio engineer, he said, tools and equipment don't create talent. And really, when it comes down to being a JIT programmer or just-in-time programmer, if you're familiar with the concept, really, you don't have to have the highest IQ in the room. You don't have to be the smartest person, but you do have to have what I call grit. And that's passion, patience, and perseverance is really what it comes down to. The second column here, talking about the 3 expertise hurts. This is a big one, these 3 things: picking a fringe technology, clinging to a fading technology, or holding an emotional attachment to a technology, or being very partial to one, or showing spite for one. Avoid liking what you use and not liking what you don't use, and the reverse is also true. Just being able to program with whatever tools you're given, whatever technology you're up against, and being able to essentially make lemonade out of lemons, as they say. And talking about how great something is won't bring it back. I know a lot of people reminisce about the old days with such and such technology and how much better it was and all of this, but you've got to keep up and you've got to just get with whatever technology is marketable at the time. So it really involves constant learning and unlearning when you need to. So, what helps me with my learning is to diversify it. Pluralsight is a really good tool for that. Certification exams, conferences, brown bags, blogs, books, code challenges, setting SMART goals for yourself. The acronym SMART, if you're familiar with that. Talking about, Dan Appleman gave a great Pluralsight course on how to keep up with technology and how to keep your skills marketable. And he made a distinction. He kind of had it as a pyramid. If you start out with the fundamentals, which is basically the kind of stuff that you'll learn in an introductory programming class, and really master the fundamentals, or we say knowledge, because knowledge is so cheap. You know, with the internet, we have access to everything. We can Stack Overflow something, we can Google something. So what really sets us apart and keeps us marketable is the ability to apply what we've learned and being able to sit down and program an application without having to rely on our tools or our technologies, so to speak. And then he talked above fundamentals as information, which is more implementation specific, learning how to do something you would see on Stack Overflow. And then skills, being able to do it yourself, implement a solution by yourself, for example, contributing to an open source project where there's, you have to rely on your own skills for that. And then finally, you can reach the highest level of the training pyramid, which is innovation, being able to be a true consultant or an architect and know how to apply skills to a particular problem set. Really, breadth versus depth is important. That's the whole concept of JIT programming, is learning as you go. For example, they give the example of having to do a REST API and learning about REST and JSON while you're doing it. So you're gathering the information and the skills of how to do it at the time, but you're learning the fundamentals at the same time. And that helps to make yourself more diverse in your skill sets. Definitely, so many technology stacks now use such a variety of different skills and require a lot of different skills and technology, so it's good to diversify. And then platform versus language. It's great that you know C#, but you've got to know the framework. What are you going to build with that knowledge of that programming language? And so focus on platform, not just language as well. So habit number 5, being as unapproachable as possible to people who know less than you about stuff. Again, talking about the whole ego thing, right? Saying that soft skills are overrated. Really, sometimes we have to overcome our preconceived notions of the people that we work with, and we tend to kind of prescribe labels to them. I thought this graphic was interesting and kind of holds true with stereotypes and everything else. And so breaking down those barriers and treating each other as people really will help those relationships. Really, when I think about soft skills and being approachable, I think about leadership and leadership, CEO, for example, being a great CEO, being a great mentor, being a great leader, all of these things apply. And so there was a great article, The 5 Talents of Great CEOs, talking about people and objectives and knowing exactly what winning means, having a short-term strategy with your tactics and a long-term, short-term tactics and long-term, which is the strategy approaches to things. Being able to effectively communicate and help cultivating a culture that's not toxic, and then knowing accountability, knowing what your metrics are. Of course, being a great mentor. I've never met a great programmer that isn't also a great mentor, and being able to teach others and exercise patience and avoid being condescending. And then, of course, being a great leader is also important. I love how Travis Bradberry in Emotional Intelligence, he talks about the definition of leadership as a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others toward the achievement of a greater good, which is great because none of that definition talks about your position, your seniority, being charismatic, those kinds of things that you associate with a leader. It's really about empowering others and turning vision into a reality. So habit number 6, with requirements, assume everything, especially when you think it's common sense, right? And this is very important because you have so many different people with different skill sets, knowledge level, and when they look at a project and the requirements for that, they envision lots of different things. My favorite one here is how the programmer wrote it. So talking about objectives.
The number one complaint from employees is unclear objectives.
My number one complaint is that it takes too much effort for me to be clear.
Let's call it a tie.
Why are they so selfish?
And this is a good quote. To save time, let's just assume I know everything. Said nobody ever. This is just, and what's funny is we make so many assumptions as developers thinking that we know what the requirements are without really checking with our customers first and making sure we're on the same page. I love this quote. The vision of technology is something you can buy according to a plan, then have it delivered as if it were coming off a truck. Flatters and relieves managers who have no idea, no interest in how this stuff works. It's also a breeding ground for disaster. And talking about, Steve Smith gave a quote when he was referring to domain-driven design, but I think this totally applies to clear, concise requirements. It says there are two ways to fail in software development. Either we build the thing wrong, in other words, a bug, or we build the wrong thing. And it's that second one that always gets us, because we can be the best programmer in the world, but if we're building the wrong thing, if we don't understand the requirements, it's much harder to fix. And so communication is really critical so that we avoid that second way of failing. So this really involves getting everyone engaged, because you have managers or stakeholders that don't want to get bogged down with details. They don't know exactly what they want, or they just don't know the right questions to ask. And so really it should be a team effort in not only implementing requirements, but setting requirements and really making sure that everyone's involved in that decision-making process. Because really, for me, software engineers, in my opinion, are creators just as much as they are builders. And so we like to have some creative input in the process. Again, the whole assuming things, it's really important to practice reflexive listening if you're familiar with that concept. And also the platinum rule. Everyone talks about the golden rule of treating others how you would like to be treated. But really, I think we can take that a step further in the platinum rule and say we're going to treat others how they would like to be treated. And of course, stop testing in prod. Getting feedback as early as possible in the chain saves you so much money from a managerial perspective and so much time and effort from a developer perspective. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes or so left. So we're going to talk about habit 7, which is one of my favorites, because I see it all the time, trying not to try to overcomplicate everything, because purism is king and you're awesome. You know, we get so many, well, first let's read this. Should I ask? I'm locked out. I'm trying to get my roommate to let me in. First, I tried her cell phone, but it's off. I tried the IRC, but she's not online. I couldn't find anything to throw at her window, so I SSH'd in the Mac Mini in the living room, got the speech synth to yell at her for me, but I left the volume way down. So I'm reading the OS X docs to learn to set the volume via the command line. Okay, so she said, oh, okay, so I take it the doorbell doesn't work, right? Talking about premature optimization, but I think premature generalization also goes in hand in this of, can you pass the salt? Says, I know, I've been developing a system to pass you arbitrary condiments. It's been 20 minutes. Well, what's lifetime in the long run, right? Unfortunately, we don't have time to watch this, but when you do have a second to go back through the slides, this overly complicated coffee order just really, in terms of what a project can acquire in terms of technical debt, it's really well done. So we have kind of these 3 ways of looking at code from a bird's eye view. You know, we have spaghetti code, then we have, you know, lasagna code. I don't know what you want to call that. It's all about the layers, right? But really, I think layers are great, but sometimes within those layers, things are also very messy and spaghetti-like. So I think we should go for ravioli code. I like that analogy better because it's very encapsulated. And writing code is very, very difficult, as you can see by this flow chart. So there are plenty of examples out there about very difficult code, trying to be compact, of course. And you know, C isn't that hard, right? All we have is F and is an array of unspecified size of pointers to functions that return pointers to functions that return void, right? How about mixing languages? This is awesome because we've got JavaScript and PHP. We can do it right in the same file, right? Can you imagine trying to maintain that? How about a program that prints the 12 days of Christmas? And some of these are hard to see, but one in particular that I really liked is this one right here. This is actually source code from Doom 3. This is not minified. or you know, it's not bundled or anything. It's the actual code. There was a guy that was trying to track a source of a bug, and he found out that, he said, the good news is when I found out what was the source of the bug, it was the database. It was a database query. You gotta love that, because you can just change the query, right? Well, the bad news is it was the database query. So this is literally the sequel that he had to go through. So the best software developers understand the importance of communicating with people over communicating with the computer. Really, it's about writing code for humans, right? Just because you can cram a lot of functionality into a very small amount of code doesn't mean you should. I completely agree with that. And this is my favorite quote of the entire presentation. It's Clean Code is one of my favorite books of all time, but this quote in it is also really well said. Clean code is simple and direct. Clean code reads like a well-written prose. Clean code never obscures the designer's intent, but rather is full of crisp abstractions and straightforward lines of control. It's very beautifully said. So in terms of tips to improve your obsession with purity and having to be overcomplicated, really, I love this idea, and I know there's books and things written about this, of don't make me have to think. When I go in and have to maintain your code, it should be absolutely clear what your intent is and what you're doing. And we don't have time to go over all of these specifics, but when you go over the slides again, be sure to read these clean code tips. Being pragmatic versus dogmatic. Really, it's, unfortunately, I've seen so many grandiose ideas about when it comes to being dogmatic, of people having to say, my implementation needs to look great for this conference or great for this paper, or they look at it from more of an academic perspective, and it's very, very well architected in their opinion. And having to be a slave to the principle, rather than taking a more practical approach and apply it to the needs of the requirements of the application, and making sure that it is not only working code, but also very maintainable. And so and there are some exceptions to this. I think test-driven design, for example, if you really embrace it, domain-driven design, if you really embrace it in what they would consider the purer form, I think that does help to simplify things. If the intent of the pattern is to simplify and not complicate, then I'm all for that. So don't get me wrong when we talk about pragmatic versus dogmatic in terms of design principles. And of course, quit showing off. I can't tell you how many times you get programmers that are so eager to show you how smart they are by making the most outrageously complicated code, and only they can maintain it. So they give themselves the job security, right? So really sometimes, and this is a big one, what about when you learn a new design pattern or a new technology and you've never used it before, but you really want to use it? So you shoehorn it in and try to make the pattern fit into the code rather than the other way around, right? So really, so that's the end of the major part of the presentation, but just bringing it all together to summarize what all these 7 habits or ineffective habits have in common. It's really about controlling your ego and exercising some humility and working with others, and your communication and your soft skills. There's a test I was going to have you guys do. When you have time, go through these 7 questions and ask yourself, is this true most of the time or all the time? And if you answer yes or mostly yes to those, definitely you probably want to check, keep your ego in check with that. Managing your brand. This is very important to realize that you also have a user interface. And if people don't know you, or they don't know what you can do or how well you do it, how do they know whether to hire you or not? So how marketable are you really when you're not managing your brand? So how well your brand resonates with others is very important. And that's where soft skills become just as important as the technical skills. And of course, being balanced, having a moderation in all things, whether you're trying to diversify your skill sets, balancing your needs with the other people, with people that you work with, just basically keeping triangles happy, the triangles that we talked about in here, and just being a really balanced person with both soft and technical skills, I think will help you in your career be both healthy and effective. All right, thanks. That's it.